This is Oregon wide receiver Troy Franklin.
He's one of the most productive receivers in the class. Also a true junior with 4.41 speed, age adjusted 92nd percentile production, 3.3 yards per route run. He averaged over 20 fantasy points per game with Bo Nix as his quarterback. In terms of EPA per route, third best. And then to me, one of the true remarkable things about his statistical profile, the fifth highest success rate per target, which is pretty impressive because he has a bunch of his targets obviously coming way down the field because of his speed.
Just some numbers that matter, counting stats, almost 1,400 yards, 14 touchdowns this past season. Would like a explosive gain of 15 plus yards on 44% of your catches be pretty good? That happened with him. 37 this past season out of 84 catches with a 13.1 ADOT. He rarely played out of the slot too. Just like 13% of his snaps this past season were in the slot. 6'2", just a shade under that, 176 pounds. That surprised me. Some other measurements for him: 8 3/4 inch hands, which is 9th percentile, a 4.4 140, 85th percentile vert, 69th percentile broad jump, 63rd percentile three cone, and a 30th percentile shuttle. Hayden, to be honest with you, I am having a tough time with Troy Franklin. So tell me the goods. What do you like about his game?
So, like you said, he has the ability to win from the perimeter and downfield. And I think that some of his length comes in play. I think he's very good over his shoulder, kind of catching that in. And I think his frame does help him do that. He made some fantastic contested catches where he's jumping up. The vertical did not surprise me at all. And I think that's kind of the bread to his game right there, is just winning downfield and having a little bit more length than this type of profile. Now, to go to the negatives, I do think that there's limitations because of the frame, those tiny hands that you're talking about. Yeah, the weight. He can kind of get launched against press man coverage at times. And I think that his ability to work over the middle, to me, is his biggest red flag to his profile. If you were watching the NFL Combine, you saw this with the gauntlet drill. I'm not sure how much he trusts his hands working over the middle, and they didn't really ask him to win over the middle very often. So I think for right now, where I'm kind of coming from is he's somebody that's going to be able to take the top off. And I think he's young, so you can develop him over the middle, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily going to be where he's going to win in the NFL.
A couple stats to back that up. If we're talking about routes beyond the line of scrimmage this past season at Oregon, 76% of his routes were either slants, hitches, or goes. So it was almost limited to that straight line that we talk about. And then PFF charts something called tight window targets. In 2023, he caught 3 of 26 tight window targets this past season. And I went in and watched every single one of those because what you talked about stood out to me of, hey, when there is contact, when someone, a defensive back, is converging on him on these in-breaking routes or along the sideline, man, it just seems like he is so easily taken off of his mark. A lot of his production is really important. He definitely has that long speed, but and he did have a bunch of, wide open targets thanks to Oregon's offense. They use their spacing very, very well, but he's a solid athlete. He's not short. He's skinny. I did see like every once in a while, like those lean in, snap out routes versus man. He does get off balance due to contact either early or late in his route. I thought he was super unsuccessful. He was better in 2022 with it, but like this past season when we watched it, that gives me major questions of, is he one of these difference maker number 2 wide receivers, or is he just a number 2 wide receiver out there? And in that case, there might be like a Troy Franklin every single draft class.
I settled in kind of more in the second half of that evaluation. I have him as a strict round 2 grade, not even an early round 2. And this class is so loaded. He actually ends up right now as my wide receiver 10 in the class. There was some top 5 hype for him, but as I watched him, I just saw some limitations they're talking about. Like my stat I had, only 11 of his 21 slant targets were caught. Only 6 of them went for a first down. Those are like more or less kind of gimmies, especially in a very RPO based offense where you're just like reading it. There's no one else working over that part of the field. You should be able to catch that in boogie. I didn't think that his like wiggle laterally was super impressive. The short shuttle, he was in the 30th percentile. So that's some evidence towards that. So I think that he's kind of this deep threat only. The comps that I have, Jameson Williams, Darnell Mooney, Jalen Hyatt, Quentin Johnson. I thought people kind of had differing opinions on Quentin Johnson, but I thought he was going to be struggling working over the middle and he's going to be a deep threat until he can beat press man coverage. Those are the kind of names, and those are day 2 names to me. But it's hard to overlook just how productive he was being 21 years old from a Power 5 school. Like that, I think to me it gives him a floor. And then I think the speed is a little bit faster on film than what the 4.4 140 time is. Apparently he was battling the flu during that.
Well, and I actually think that 4.4 140 is hampered by his 10-yard split, which was a 1.61, which is 19th percentile. So people call it the flying 20, kind of like that middle portion. That's probably where he picked up a lot of his pace. And obviously his miles per hour numbers during his time at Oregon lean into the fact that he's one of the faster wide receivers of this group. I'm fine with like a 4.4 140 when it comes to this play style. But yeah, it probably could have been even better if it wasn't for that start that he had.
If it was a 60-yard dash, he would look really impressive. And I think that's part of it.
But at the same time, I think you can see a potential slower 10-yard split in his game on tape, where if a corner is able to stick into his hip pocket and press man coverage and again contact him, then you're not going to be as successful as you are when he gets to that 20 or 30-yard mark, when he gets up to his fastest. And again, that's where all these big chunk gains came from.
Yep. And I think once he has a little bit of separation, he is going to continue that down the field because his long speed is way better than his short area burst. So yeah, I think that he has a chance to be like a quality number 2 wide receiver. I don't think he's going to be the target earner though. I think this is kind of like where I like Jameson Williams tape more than Troy Franklin's coming out of college, but I think that maybe if this one role, if you're just a downfield guy that's really slender, I'm not sure if that's like a true number 1 wide or a true like first round wide receiver anymore. We saw like Jalen Hyatt, who also had some of this kind of round 1-2. He goes into the third round. Those are Oregon and Tennessee. It's not the same offense, but there's a little bit Mickey Mousey.
I was going to bring this up. I mean, if people have stuck with us on the channel for over a year, you really liked Jalen Hyatt. So I would be confused if you didn't like Troy Franklin.
I had Jalen Hyatt with a round 2 grade. I had Troy Franklin with a round 2 grade. I had Hyatt slightly ahead of Franklin because I thought that Hyatt had a little bit more wiggle to him and maybe a little bit better at the catch point than Troy Franklin. But that said, there was a couple times where Troy Franklin, if he's going straight up and having to high point the ball, he can win those contested catches because his length is impressive and he does have bunnies to get up in the air. I think the contested catches that I'm worried about is he trusting his hands? Is he letting the ball come into him? And then as a safety or a linebacker, or just that corner, just playing right through him where he doesn't have the mass to kind of stay in the ground.
To round this out, to open, I said that I was having trouble with Troy Franklin. I think that also played into, I watched Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, and then Troy Franklin after that. So, but in that case, I took to Twitter asking all of you for your comparisons. And when I say they were all over the map, they were all over the map. They ranged from Devontae Smith, which I think y'all need to watch some ball. If you think that these two guys play the same, they might weigh the same. They don't play the same, but all the way down to like MVS, Paul Richardson, who I actually remember Paul Richardson, I believe at Colorado, being really good with bucket catches and contested situations. The names that I came up with, Robbie Chosen Anderson and Nelson Aguilar. Is kind of where I went. Nelson Aguilar was a first round pick and kind of didn't develop that consistency aspect. Robbie Anderson's had a couple really good seasons in the NFL, and actually they're around the same height. But that's kind of that role player, that streaky role player in ways that can make a real mark for 2 or 3 or 4 games, but is not, as you said, that target earner, that focal point of the offense. That maybe this statistical profile might lend itself to frequently.
Better in best ball. I think like compared to MVS, I think that Troy Franklin is just a little bit looser of an athlete, more reliable type of player here. But I think like comparing him to like Xavier Worthy, where we're talking about speed is the name of the game for both of these guys, not very physical. I think that Xavier Worthy,
I prefer Xavier Worthy.
So do I. I don't think it's that close, just because I think that Worthy is a more dynamic athlete kind of before and after the catch. So I moved like Xavier Worthy ahead, and then you get into your, like, if we're talking about number 2 receivers, then it's like, okay, do you want your slot wide receiver types with like the Ricky Pearsall, Ladd McConkey's, or do you want the vertical element of Troy Franklin? I just think that this like take the lid off of the defense. I think that's just maybe a little bit overvalued. Like you said, there's a bunch of these type of guys that are 180 pounds that could run a 4.4. The Chargers keep trotting out UDFA guys for this role, driving us nuts. But I think
Tyrell Williams was one of the names that came up in that comparison list too.
Okay,
yeah. If Troy Franklin learns a short and intermediate inside game, breaking route game, that would do wonders for the profile that he puts out there. But just right now, we don't have that. All right, there we go. go right now, watch the rest of the videos that we have on all of these wide receiver prospects. The more of you that subscribe, the more cooler stuff that we get to do, and the more videos we get to make for all of you to watch. So hit that button, hit thumbs up, and we'll check you on the next one.